Thank you, Ryan, and congratulations once again to all our winners. We now move on to a sector that has been in the limelight during the pandemic. This pandemic has posed a different set of challenges to pharma companies. With ever-changing external conditions, the companies have had to rely on innovation to meet these challenges without compromising on their ethical and moral obligations. The moderator for this panel is Mr. Suhas Tuljapurkar, Managing Partner, Legasis Partners, and Founder Director of Legasis Services Private Limited. With over 37 years of lawyering experience, Mr. Tuljapurkar is one of the leading lawyers in India in the field of compliance, corporate governance, ethics, and legal strategies. I'd also like to welcome our esteemed panelists. Our first panelist is Ms. Debolina Pratap, the General Counsel and Vice President, Legal, Wockhardt Limited. Debolina is a gold medalist in Masters of Law and has over 27 years of experience in banking, finance, pharma, and healthcare. She advises top management on legal risks to the organization and excels in settling complex financial petitions filed against Wockhardt, multi-jurisdictional arbitrations, and settling intricate derivative suits filed globally. She remains to be one of the few general counsels who handle forensics and data analytics. She and her team have won numerous awards and accolades, both nationally and internationally. Our next panelist is Mr. Sanjay Sonar, the owner of Biogenomics Limited. As one of the founder directors of Biogenomics, Mr. Sonar specializes in protein engineering with an emphasis on process scale protein folding, protein purification, characterization, and downstream process organizations for biologics. He was also one of the founder directors of Molecular Diagnostics Private Limited, India's first private sector diagnostic laboratory exclusively focused on molecular pathology. Our next panelist is Mr. Manish Gupta, the Managing Director of Sequence Scientific Limited. Manish is the Managing Director of Sequence Scientific Limited, which has emerged as India's largest and globally the 20th largest animal health company with annual revenues of over $175 million within 5 years. Spearheaded by Manish, Sequent has a strong global footprint with plants in India, Turkey, Spain, Germany, and Brazil, with products being sold in over 95 countries, and is also the only US FDA-approved animal health facility in India. Our next panelist is Mr. Kehzad Hazari, the President and Global General Counsel for Glenmark Pharmaceuticals. Mr. Hazari has over 25 years of rich experience in the pharmaceutical industry and is skilled in negotiations, business planning, patent law, and biotechnology. In his role as the President and Global General Counsel, Mr. Kehzad leads the corporate affairs and the legal and intellectual property functions of Glenmark globally. He has earlier worked with companies such as Hindalco and Asian Paints. I now hand over the stage to Mr. Tuljapurkar to commence the panel discussion.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We have probably audience across the globe today. We more than about 2,000 in the audience. We're going to today discuss about a transformational sector, which is pharma and biotech. I'm going to kind of request everybody for their opening remarks, starting with Debolina, ladies first. And I'm going to kind of also say that, you know, we as India, as Indian pharma and biotech sector, we are going through some challenging phase at one times. But at the other hand, we sense that there is a tremendous opportunity and that there is a tremendous capacity in the Indian pharma and biotech sector. So while like typically India has always been in the middle of two contradictions, if I were to put it that way. But I want, with COVID, with whatever has happened in past 7 months, which is contextual in nature, but even prior to that, pharma was considered to be bankruptcy remote kind of a sector. And we've all experienced the growth of pharma right from generics onwards. So where do we stand today as pharma and biotech sector? And what are your opening comments, especially in the context of COVID-19 situation? The pandemic, now 2020 or most of the 2020 is gone by. So Debolina, I'm going to start with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suhas. Good day, everyone. Um, Thank you for this opportunity, Economic Times and Legacies. The most critical thing of the pharma industry, and specifically from a legal perspective, as I have experienced, if I can say, during the COVID-19 challenging times, is unlearning a lot of things. Pharma was always very compliance driven, extremely strict in terms of applications, processes, SOPs. It was a sector where you couldn't afford to make mistakes because you were dealing with patient lives, whether it was pharma or healthcare. And you had bundle of these, regulations across the globe to follow. But with the COVID-19, I think the biggest thing which we learned was to unlearn all these things and start new followings, I would say, quote unquote, they are followings. Because the entire government or the regulators were also in a very perplexed situation. They also did not know how to cope up with all these sudden changes, which actually led to a lot of non-compliances, not because of will, but because of situations. So as and when, the authorities, the regulators, the government, the global politics, global economics went through this, this maze of nebula, the pharma industry was no stranger. And we had to unlearn a lot of things and follow new guidelines, set new guidelines, implement them without having that situation where we don't err on protecting lives. I think that was the biggest learning I had, and I am sure the pharma industry also had that biggest learning. That would be my opening statement for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debalina. Manishji, been in the industry for a long time, veteran, so to speak. What are your kind of opening remarks on the current context, so to speak?
I concur with what Debalina stated. I believe the COVID situation, in a way, has brought the pharma industry back in limelight, which in a way, it was off the radar for a couple of years, partly due to our own making, because there was a time when we struggled to keep pace with the new expectations around compliance, and partly because obviously when the entire world is doing well, then the so-called secular industries tend to take a back seat. But last 6 months have clearly shown or kind of brought back the importance of pharma. The only slight difference I have with what Debalina mentioned is actually, in my view, compliance has been even more stronger in pharma in the last 6 months. And when I say compliance, it is not about the pharmaceutical compliance, but even to how to deal with the COVID situation and keep the plants running. That entailed a different level of compliance in the behaviors. And in a way, that was new learning for us. But the way we ensured, most pharmaceutical companies, how they ensured plants operational in spite of all the physical challenges that we were all faced with, and kept the patient care of utmost importance in this in a very compliant way, I think has been the biggest takeaway for me from this crisis.
Thank you, Manishji. I'm going to request Kaizad. Kaizad, you've seen various kinds of managements within pharma. I'm going to request you. Is there any different way then that the multinational perspective is slightly different from the Indian manufacturer's perspective or generic perspective when we talk about in the context of COVID-19 pandemic situation?
Thanks, Suhas, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me here. Suhas, very interesting point. The way in which I have seen, I think if you have to draw a comparison between the MNCs and the Indian organizations, I would say some of the Indian promoter-driven organizations are pretty nimble. They are pretty quick in adapting the change. And you would have seen multiple examples, particularly in this time of crisis, where the Indian companies have really come up and introduce the product so quickly in the market that would help the COVID situation. Whereas I think MNCs, all said and done, not to kind of criticize them as such, but they are a bit slow, more process driven to the extent that it slows down the entire exercise. So I would say that's a big plus for an Indian company vis-a-vis an MNC, where the decision making is maybe if it's an MNC, it goes to their headquarters, and then there is a complete process that has to go through, and then those decisions are made. Whereas in an Indian organization, the promoter sitting over there makes those calls and it is very quick, or the board makes those calls and they are very much quick in their decision making, and that helps to a large extent meeting the needs of the people in large, because those are the needs which are required to be met at a very fast pace. You can't wait because there are people getting affected, there are people dying. So you have to have something that comes in the market very quickly. And I think that's what a lot of Indian companies have done. And those have not only been restricted, and benefits of those are not restricted only to the Indian population at large. People across the globe have benefited out of some of these products that have been developed by the Indian companies today. So that's my comment on what the question that you have raised was. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Kaizad. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn to Dr. Sanjay Sonar, and I think interestingly, what is it that the newer generations, or let's say newer companies, so to speak, have the learnings from the context of COVID and the current situation? Sanjay?
Yes. Thanks, Suhas. Thanks, Economic Times, for this opportunity. COVID times has really, probably has been a paradigm shift in every sense. The healthcare, its significance, how COVID diagnostics, COVID therapeutics has come to fore, and not only that, how associated comorbidities and their treatments like diabetes also have come to fore. All these things have become so significant in the COVID. What we were amazed as new company to see was the response with which government also cleared a lot of things in silico, virtually, by web conferences, etc., etc. And that is something also a new paradigm. Lot of faceless activities. Again, as Kedar and as Manish was saying, actually the stringency of operation at manufacturer level has actually gone up. So compliance has gone up because of COVID fear and all those things. That is on one side. And if I were to take back this discussion now, because I'm probably the last of the opening remarks, and take this discussion towards compliance, I want to give a larger perspective of where compliance stands for something like biotechnology industry. So I'll come back to that later, Suhas, so we can discuss that.
Thanks a lot, Sanjay. So there probably is kind of a commonality or unanimous resolution that the challenging times have thrown open new challenges, and the industry has geared up to it. But having said that, you see, I'm going to kind of slightly look at things in a very different manner. You have, let's say, almost about $41 billion industry in India, which is pharma and biotech together. This is the world's third largest by the volume and 13th largest by the value. It's expected to grow between 12 to 14, although the growth figures today can actually mean nothing, because again, I think the COVID-19, not the black swan, but the black elephant in the room today has actually thrown all the statistics out of the window. So whether the Indian pharma industry will grow at 12 to 14% or will have a phenomenal growth or will kind of show a decline is anybody's guess. But having said that, there are two vital aspects that have come to the forefront. You see, while there is a deglobalization that has happened, decoupling that has happened, the key sourcing material today is still not available in India, and you probably have to look at China and other countries and look at it as a import. I think for most of the companies, the supply chain was under pressure. Supply chain was tremendously focused around at the beginning of the lockdown, so to speak. And that resulted into looking inwards to look at whether the key sourcing material is possible today to be manufactured either through backward integration or reverse engineering in India today. And I think the chemical industry to an extent came to the forefront to look at and solve this problem. But that's only one part of it. The second major part, what I see, is that we have almost about 1,400 WHO GMP approved pharma plants today. You have 253 European Directorate Quality Medicine approved plants today. And India kind of boasts about the largest number of pharma plants which are US FDA qualified plants or approved plants, so to speak. Having said that, I think the real challenge is in terms of maintaining the standard at a global level. The real challenge is in terms of saying that while we may have enough talent and wherewithal available with us to develop the technologies, our definition of quality, our definition of compliance lacks somewhere. You see, and I'm going to request Kaizad, because Kaizad, you've kind of seen across the globe, what compliance means. At one level, in Indian context, we have seen some of the pharma companies are complying by tick the box approach, while there are some who actually go to the other extreme of taking it very, very seriously and have kind of anti-bribery, anti-corruption policies to the extent which are driven by ex-Director General of Police, for example. I'm just giving you a broad overview. But at the same time, on an average, the perception about Indian quote-unquote pharma manufacturer generics is that compliance is taken as tick the box approach. There may be companies which are doing very well, and I'm not and all of you who are sitting here have taken compliance so seriously that it's not about your company, it's not about what you know. But there are some third parties who kind of look at things differently. You see, from that perspective, Kaizad, is this why one of the major factors that we're not able to compete at the global level?
So Suhas, it's an interesting question, but I partly agree and I partly disagree to begin with. I'll tell you, see, if as you mentioned, the Indian plants today are under various foreign FDA approved plants. I know for sure that at any given point in time, there is some foreign FDA sitting in our plants and doing an audit. So almost 12 months, every month, or there are multiple audits that are ongoing. And so is the case across the industry for various other companies who are operating globally. So I would say it's a perception sometimes, people develop because of historical reasons. And that to a large extent is changing, Otherwise, today, India is the largest generic manufacturer which caters to the unmet needs across the globe, and it is serving millions and millions of people across the globe. And by producing cheap and good quality drugs, imagine if those drugs are not working, why would people consume those drugs? Of course they are working, and they are fully FDA compliant and compliant in all respects, on par with any other foreign or organization's drugs. But that's again a perception, and that perception is taking time to change because of historical reasons. A few companies here and there were involved in certain practices, and that's an impression that has got created. But I would say to a large extent it is changing. But having said that, as far as manufacturing quality and production is concerned, I would say superb. Indian companies to a large extent have really come a long way. But within India, there are certain practices that are prevalent, which may not necessarily be fully compliant. We have this UCP MP, how you are interacting with your HCPs, that needs to change to a large extent, I would say. That's something which is changing. It will take time, but I don't know, when you have a voluntary code, people are just taking it very lightly. I don't think so. It is really impacting the way in which it has to impact. And I think it's high time the government realizes this, that this is not really moving the needle, and they may bring about a law which will then really go after these organizations who are not complying. So I think to a large extent, I would say, as far as production quality is concerned, goods are fantastic, on par with any other foreign multinational. But certain practices in India are prevalent. People are waiting, others are doing, why should I stop? And that's where it is causing a lot of problems. And that's where I think the messaging is going wrong somewhere globally.
Yeah, thanks, Kaizad, for that. Manish ji, I think it's very interesting that Kaizad kind of took a stand to say that on one hand, you have the products which are manufactured, which are globally competitive, which are globally compliant. Does India have a manufacturing mindset, so to speak, that it's only through inspection, audit, and the manufacturing GMP that we talk about? Of course, GCP gets doubted somewhere or the other in terms of clinical practices. But is the mindset today, therefore, that it's manufacturing, it's inspection audits? Manish ji, what your views are?
I largely agree with what Kaizad has mentioned. And I think one of the bigger mistakes which we tend to do is we look at India as with one lens. India is not one in a way. And this includes the pharmaceutical sector. There are Indian companies which are catering to India. There are Indian companies catering to both India and the global world. And then there are companies which are catering to only the global world requirements. And clearly there is a difference in the level of compliance, because even the needs of these markets are different. So compliance has to be seen in a context. There's no ideal world of compliance, or there's no single compliance for the world. There is a different context of compliance for different parts of the world. And you have to look at it from that perspective. Now, if you take the large Indian companies who have been global companies for a period of time now, at one time, it used to be an event-based compliance. So fundamentally, when the auditor used to visit, there used to be compliance, and it's an Indian habit. Like one of my entrepreneurs used to say, a guy who has jumped 10 red signals while coming to office, how can you expect him to be running with a complete compliance when he's working in the office? So there is an element that is very inherent in our nature. Now, Indian companies, because of the last 10 years of learnings, have moved dramatically away from event-based compliance, or when there was an audit on, they were compliant, to an all-time compliance. And today, I can very proudly say that top maybe 50 companies will be better or more compliant than even their counterparts in US. Okay, including the physical infrastructure. Every Indian facility is actually better than most of the facilities that exist in US and or in Europe in the pharmaceutical side. We are far more compliant than any of those local manufacturing. I genuinely believe that the manufacturing and the scientific competitiveness of India, and here I will bring in the scientific aspect more than the manufacturing aspect, is far bigger across the world. And this is something Indian companies have leveraged and will be actually leveraging even further as this COVID environment develops. Because world is now moving or looking away from China, including Indian companies themselves. So there is no other option but how India gets leverage in this, which will entail a lot of manufacturing in India, but even Indian companies will need to diversify their manufacturing to outside India.
Manish, a very interesting aspect. In a sense, on one hand, you're saying the top 50, probably top 50 companies, manufacturers in India today have virtually benchmarked on the compliance and the infrastructure, and the scientific thought process is phenomenal in India. That's a very interesting topic, which kind of leads me to believe that probably the movement, the paradigm is moving from the audit manufacturing mindset to setting up benchmarks and global best practices being brought in, which is a very heartening sign. But before I move to Devalina, I would want Sanjay to talk about this, because you see, while Sanjay's entity is still in the developmental phase, so to speak, or is just kind of entering in the commercial phase. But Sanjay, what's your take when we talk about the developmental phase and the compliances in that?
Since I'm more focused into biotech world, I'll speak a little bit about the biotech world. I want you to get a sense of perspective in the, there is a biotech, in the biotech world, there is biosimilar space, or, the biogeneric space, and it's a very unique one. India in the last 20 odd years has put out 68 biosimilar products in the world, and no other country has been able to do that. No other country. So 68 products have passed, and not a single product has failed in the clinical practices. Now that statement, if you look at, I mean, other countries are still grappling with the guidelines how to bring out biosimilar in the marketplace. India's already done it. Now there are two-layered approach in the Indian biosimilar approval process.
Sanjay, before you move forward, I just want to understand this.
Yes.
When you're talking about 68 approvals on biosimilars,
right,
do they qualify at a global level as well, based on, let's say, the US processes or US FDA processes? Or are these the approvals only from Indian perspective? Because India caught on very late in this space, only after 2012 onwards.
Yes, true. That's true. But at the same time, approval, for example, there are companies in India which took the products to the global stage. Not necessarily US FDA, but let's say European. The same products have been approved. So take Biocon, take Intas, they have been able to take these same products in the European world, in Japan, everywhere, and they're approvable. I mean, only the question is of taking the clinical trials in US are very expensive propositions and very long drawn, and there is a lot of resistance from the innovators. So that's another, and it's not very friendly for biosimilar space in the US. So therefore, there is that delay, but otherwise quality-wise, absolutely no issues. So if you take that logic, so there are now three stakeholders in a biosimilar space. One is the patient itself, right? For example, let's say take Biogen IDEC. There was a company, and so as you might know, that they came up with a molecule called rituximab way back, okay? And it was approved in 1998. It got off the patent in 2015. In the 1998, when the molecule came up, in the first 6 months only, it crossed $100 million. And it went on to become the top blockbuster. Now, moment it went off the patent, but you can imagine all these years, there was no access for other, like Pfizer's or other people of the world who could take that product all over. Indian people practically had no access to that molecule, patients. But moment that became biosimilar, it became, DRL came in, and that molecule became affordable for people in India. So your patient is benefiting. Your investors, they see value because India is a gateway to, kind of a biosimilar approval. And third is your manufacturer. So all three stakeholders are now interested. But only thing, caveat there, is the piece that we are discussing today, the compliance. Now, if we can, so compliance has, two major issues to us. Compliance is either culture, or you have to go to something like a McDonald's and dumb it down so much, that you have to make it such an executable practice and culture. You see, McDonald's is a classic example, the same standard everywhere being executed by different people of different abilities. So that means there is tremendous dumbing down of the entire quality that they have been able to achieve. Now, we have not been able to do that. We have either culturally failed, or we think that there's a cost attached to that, or there is, there is no clarity. In my opinion, take EMA, European guidelines, for example. There are clear product specific guidelines. But here, we have it's vague, it's general guideline. So can we not have clarity on that? Why have ambiguity in interpretation of compliance? So these become very, very critical in a field like biotech, where products are going directly in the blood of the patient. So the quality is extremely important in the process as well as in the product. So compliance has become a kind of cornerstone in the success of this, and it's a great discussion topic here.
No, thank you, Sanjay. Debalina, we've seen Vocard kind of being driven by not only compliance but ethics, for example. I think Khurakiwalas were the first ones who talked about Council for Fair Business Practices in India, so to speak. So I think there's a culture which is there. But do you also see that the culture and the mindset issue is still prevalent, like what Sanjay says, in terms of saying that, okay, we'll look at compliance as tick the box, and actually how do we inculcate that compliance and ethics together in the culture? Your experiences.
So once I think tick box compliance doesn't work anymore anywhere in the world. I mean, even if you go to a country, a small country like Bhutan, I don't think tick box compliance works. So either you have compliance or you don't have compliance. And when I say when you have compliance, you have to maintain a particular standard which goes across unanimity. There cannot be different sets of compliance with different stakeholders. There has to be a unanimity, a protocol or series of protocols which are practiced by way of processes. So an organization, and even I can't speak much about Wockhardt, but generally I can say as an organization, it has shifted from personality based to process based. And moment the ideology goes into a process based functioning of an organization, you achieve that parameter of compliance. And that's not a tick box compliance. It actually means that you put your heart and soul into what you're doing. So I think Manish mentioned an example that you skip 10 traffic signals to reach the office maybe on time. So what was that person having in his mind? To reach office on time? Or was he just casual of skipping the 10 red signals? So we have to be very mindful that what is getting achieved. And for that achieve, it's not the person who is important. And organization has moved away from this concept. And of course, in Wockhardt, we do believe, culture or compliance begins at the top. And if the top, the top education is inculcated downwards, things can, I won't say, things can never go wrong. But if things go wrong, you have the right process to set it right. See, when you are in the world, you are not, as the Bible says, everything is like paradise. So you do have a non-paradise situation. But what does compliance tell you, across the organization, or what does, today, what companies are trying to do is when you are in the non-paradise situation, and it could be 10%, 20%, at times, especially in COVID times, it could be 50%. What you need to have is that set of processes which gets you back into the, the full compliance situation. And that's not just tick box. So, that's my view, Suhas.
No, thanks a lot, Debalina. I think it's interesting that you said it's when you move from people to processes, you move from individualistic approach to completely processed approach. Okay. I'm going to request Kaizad. There is a third needle beyond processes, which is actually culture. How important is that? Because, we talk about individualistic approach. I think, yes, it's a top-down approach, and it's a top-driven approach when it comes to governance, compliance, and ethics, all three critical aspects of it. People are at the center. At the same time, it is not people-driven concept, or it's not driven by one individual or set of individuals. It has to be inculcated into the company as a culture, and how Is it simple? Is it difficult? I mean, we have experiencing through whatever compliance program that we're doing now for past 10 years. I think it's becoming very, very difficult to go down to the micro level in an organization, who are the owners of the compliances and the business owners there, and kind of try to convince them or convert them from, let's say, being atheist to an evangelist when it comes to compliances. Kaizad, what's been your experience, and how do you move that needle towards culture?
Thanks, Suhas. I think culture changing is the most difficult thing. So first and foremost, when you say move, you are implying that that culture does not exist. Therefore, the movement is necessary. And I would say, by and large, if you see all what we have discussed just now, I think there's a strong sense for the Indian population to a large extent is that only if we are pushed, or if there is somebody supervising, or some traffic cop standing over there, we will take a pause, we will wait for the green light to come. If not, then, so that is a culture, that's where that culture part comes in, that awareness that I should not break that signal, even though if the cop is there or it is not there, because there are various ramifications to my breaking the signal, and that's a small thing, but then it percolates and becomes very large in a different context altogether. So by and large, I think Indians are tuned towards jugaad. The way in which we think is always kuch solution nikal do isme se, kuch, so that jugaad to a large extent has helped us, but also to a large extent has pushed down that cultural part of compliance, which is so critical, and I think people are realizing it now. Things are changing, but change always takes time, and it sometimes can be disruptive, because if in a business, if you are already used to doing certain things in a particular manner, suddenly to bring about that change, and that change again, as Debolina and others have mentioned, there has to be a effort from the top guy, topmost level. There has to be a tone from the top, and you need to reinforce it time and again. It's not easy to change that culture. Culture, I think, is the most difficult thing in compliance, because it is self-driven. As I say, if the cop is there, everybody will do that. People will comply. If there is a auditor coming to your plant, everybody will comply. But compliance will achieve its 100% potential if there is a cultural change within, that yes, even though there is nobody, but still I will comply. So that's not easy, that's difficult, and it takes time and really, really a lot of effort from the top management team to ensure that that culture is inculcated across the organization. So that's my comment, Suhas.
No, thanks a lot, Kaizad. Manishji, I would want to pick your brains on one very critical aspect that Kaizad touched upon, which is to say that, when somebody is watching you, it's at that point in time that you want to put your best behavior, so to speak. You don't want to jump the signal when there is a cop there standing, or that a cop is around the corner and he's going to cut a challan for you. It's at that point in time you probably behaving in the best manner. This appears to be a cultural issue in India, whether you talk about compliances with pharma sector, or you talk about automobile sector. There does seem to be this aspect of compliance, which is going to the root of culture. And one of the issues that we have seen is that there is a micro level prescription. It's completely rule based, and therefore the regulators are telling you at the micro level what is it that you need to do as an action item, and that is considered as compliance task. So it perforce gets you into tick the box approach. It perforce tell you, if the regulator is coming there tomorrow for inspection, I need to be clean on all the elements at micro level, which is the task level or checkbox level compliances. It's driven by two aspects, I would say. One is, of course, somebody is watching you, and the second is the consequences of you being not compliant at that point in time, lead to business disruption and stopping of your business. These are the two elements of fear, so to speak, that are leading people to comply with whatever they are required to comply or comply with the compliance obligations. Pharma stands out slightly differently at the global level because I think a lot of people depend on pharma to drive the compliances, especially the regulatory compliance. It's been one of the foremost regulatory compliance driven industry, which is kind of given confidence to all the stakeholders, including the patients, so to speak, or the consumers there. But how critical it is, therefore, to look at principle based compliances and say that whether somebody is watching or not watching, you're eventually responsible to your consumers who are patients, and therefore you need to, at the ground level, forget the tone at the top is very clear and everybody drives that, but actually the business owner is that person on the assembly line who is going to take the final quality control check. How critical it is to inculcate the culture there, and what do we do? How do you do it?
Suhas, I don't think there is an easy answer to this. And I think that is the fundamental reason why people like us exist. I mean, if everything was ready-made and it is easily implementable, then most of us wouldn't have had a job. So that's the way I look at it. Clearly, there is a challenge because there is an inherent culture of the country, and there is also an inherent demand of this global industry. And there is a bit of a difference in the same. How do you marry it? Can it be done one time, or is it a journey? Personally, I see it as a journey. It starts from the top, but it has to be practiced at the bottom. Clearly, the top or the entrepreneur has seen a big cost of non-compliance or being seen as non-compliance. So what has happened in last 10 years in the Indian context, wherein a lot of companies lost huge amount of market capitalization, and given that Indian companies has one big shareholder, so obviously the major cost was borne by the shareholder or the entrepreneur. So he understands the cost, definitely, and all the stakeholders therefore also understand the implications of that non-compliance. So where I'm coming from is, there is no ready-made answer. I think it's a journey which all of us have to go through. It starts from the top, but we have to make it process-driven so that it is executed at the bottom. And it has to happen without supervision. That has to become a cultural aspect, but it takes time. And it starts from taking the first recruitment. How do you recruit? Because see, there is only few things that you can change in a human being. But if you try to change the basics of a human being, it is impossible. So I think the critical aspect is hiring the right talent. And then grooming him 20%, 30% is easy, coming from the organization framework that you have established. So the way I look at it is, how do you institutionalize the culture? Everyone knows where is the end outcome, but how do you drive the journey? And how do you monitor that journey? Because it's a journey, you have to have daily milestones, there have to be a weekly milestones, there have to be monthly milestones, and you have to keep progressing on that front. And that visibility has to be top driven. I mean, the top has to be honest. I mean, one of the biggest way I evaluate an Indian company is how do we deal with bad news? Does the company give the bad news on its own, or is the law compelling them to give a bad news? Good news always travels very fast. I mean, moment there is a successful FDA audit, the company comes out with a press release. It's same day. But what happens when there is not a successful FDA audit? Does the company come out on its own, or they are only compelled when it is published on FDA website that the company comes out with their press release? I think that will give you a good identification or a barometer of the culture of the organization.
No, very well said, Manishji. I think I'm just kind of, yeah. Devalina, you want to add something there?
I have a, I'm digressing a little from pharma to healthcare. And I have not a question, but I would want a reaction. One is I would want from you, Suhas, and also from Kaizad. Yesterday night, almost you could say 12 in the morning today, we got a circular from the Bombay Municipal Corporation in terms of, this is in the healthcare sector. So we all know, for COVID treatments, the hospitals, and especially the private hospitals, 80% has to be reserved as per the BMC rules and notifications. So, the treatment, the charges, and, everything is prescribed in that. 20% is left open. So we get this beautiful notification at 12 a.m. in the morning saying that this 80% which you are going to comply and you're going to admit patients only after the ward head approves. Now, the reality, there's a huge queue for admission for COVID patients. 80% of my hospitals are blocked. I have to wait for the ward head to give approval, whether I should admit the person in 80% or not. And if, let us say that there are needy patients who are not getting the approval and they cannot afford the 20%, what do I do? Here is a very classic case of compliance of the notification, your business decision or your service decision, because I am talking about healthcare. And how do you still not, you take a service decision, you have to comply with the notification and still not violate. So how, I have to advise, I've still not advised down the line. They have been asking me and, I had to get into this call because, Dr. Murtaza couldn't attend, so I had to get into this call. But, if you, as a panelist, and of course with anybody, I mean, Sanjay, Manish, anyone can, but especially, Suhas and Kaizad, I would want help from you on this.
See, Devalina, what I would look at it from a fundamental perspective is there are bound to be aberrations to this rule. Okay. And probably the aberrations are going to be more than following the rule itself, which is what I would invoke is a doctrine of necessity as the principle and a fundamental. I would say that the duty of the hospital predominantly today is to save the patient, is to make sure that I'm able to address at the local level, at the ground level, without waiting for a formal approval from any ward office or ward officer for that matter. And I would end up saying doctrine of necessity will give me enough room available so that I don't, I address this correctly. At the same time, I make sure that aberrations are taken into fold. You see, and I'm sure, you see, if we reach out to the commissioner somewhere and say that, fine, this is the policy that we have, and these are going to be the aberrations where I'm not going to go back to the ward officer. I'm not going to go back to the commissioner. I need this exemption as an elbow room available to me so that I'm able to address the necessity. I don't think commissioner or anybody can find fault with it. Neither would the court ever find fault with it. You see, therefore, I would say, fine, as a matter of rule, I will do it, but aberrations are bound to be there. And those aberrations are virtually because of doctrine of necessity today. We have seen, and I must share this with everybody, we have seen during COVID, there are 1,000+ circulars that have come up. Some of them are properly law through delegated legislation. Most of them are not even administrative directives. They fall foul of being law. Okay, so one is, of course, while you kind of set the rule for your organization, I think it would be an interesting aspect to see whether this is properly following the letter of law and delegated legislation, to see whether it is law or not, and prepare your defenses around it. You see, we have done this umpteen number of times during COVID in past 6 months. I think in the initial stage, we also created a resource center whereby all these directives are placed there in order for you to understand whether it is law or it is not a law. I think broadly, I would deal with it that way because, I've been in-house counsel and I know, we kind of get into these problems quite often. Kaizad, your take, please.
So, Debolina, I think these are unprecedented times. As you know, this is a pandemic situation, and the way in which I see it is that, for example, just as a example to this, the Indian government is also writing the WHO and all, asking that the patent protection will not be given in respect of COVID medicines. Now, what happens to those innovative companies who will not get the patent protection because of these unprecedented pandemic times? I think what, as an organization, you can do is, why 80%? Why not 100%? May not make commercial sense. I think the thing is that you have to build confidence with the government. You have to work along with the government to support them in this kind of a crisis situation. And I'm sure, I think some of the hotels who had allowed patients to be treated were given some exemption by the government in terms of property taxes, so on and so forth. I think a dialogue with the government and building that confidence with the government of Maharashtra is very important, and to be seen as an opportunity to partner with them in this kind of a crisis situation to help patients ultimately. I think it's all about trust. Once the government realizes that you as an organization are along with them, they would support you in all aspects, instead of just putting down a diktat. But it may not make commercial sense. I understand that. But I think in these unprecedented pandemic times, I think the best way to do it is to support and see what best can be done. And as Suhas mentioned, there are so many circulars and orders coming out. They are also learning in the process. They are also not very clear what they want, how to handle this kind of a crisis situation. But the only thing that you can develop is trust and confidence, and say that we are with you. But at the same time, if we continue like this for 6 months, this hospital will shut down. So you have to play that balance with them and get their confidence and then go along.
The take, as Manish had mentioned, that there is someone watching over you. So I think, as the two of you said, and as Manish said, there's a lot of new things we are learning. And most importantly, the watcher. We should work with the watcher so that they don't become the witcher, quote unquote.
Very much.
So so I do appreciate, and on the commercial front, I think it's not the issue of a commercial front. It's more of an issue of how do you put the patient needs in the matrix of a compliance. And obviously that's very difficult to meet. And, as there's a very famous book, Difficulty of Being Good. But yes, we have to, live with the difficulty till it no longer remains a difficulty. So, thank you, Suhas, and thank you, Kaizad.
So I think Debolina raised a very, I must say, pertinent issue here, which is there are some compliances which don't make sense. There are some compliances which are so very difficult. They're not simple, they're not transparent. They're very difficult to comply with. Notwithstanding that, the industry and we all understand the difficulty or difficult compliances which are essential, which make sense. And I think notwithstanding the jugad or chalta hai attitude, we will end up making sure that we are compliant. But there are some things which are not simple. They're not transparent. You see, they're not integrated compliances. You have multiple regulators to comply with. And I'm saying this is getting complex by the day rather than being simpler by the day. You see, therefore, while when we talk about APIs in this sector and we talk about how China emerged as kind of a global API player, was where I think the API clusters emerged, where there were common facilities, common compliances, and the governments pushed them to kind of comply with, so that they could globally compete not only with the Indian APIs, but actually took the center stage there. So the difficulty of compliance is one area where, while we would expect the government and the regulators to come out with a simplified, transparent, and integrated compliances, I think as an industry, I think it is also very important as to how do we simplify the compliances. Sanjay, your take on this.
So as I think I was trying to get into this discussion, I think you said it very aptly, that it is a micromanaged, compliance versus principle-based compliance. I can tell you that it has become so micromanaged, and it has becoming so much evolving scientific situation, scientifically also, that we are literally looking at a moving goalpost each time we face a government audit. The rules have changed. For example, in a clinical trial approval, the same statistical understanding of a trial has changed by the same committee in the next meeting that you go and present, because they learned something new. Okay, now what is happening here, I will just draw upon my experience as a faculty of biotechnology at IIT. I can tell you that as a student or as a teacher, we were never exposed to the fundamental principles of compliance or statistics or regulatory or need for that. So it is not ingrained into our psychology for it to become culture in the first place. So that is number one. Number two, we need to really deeply understand the broader top level lighthouse kind of principles in the compliance as a guiding vision, rather than having an extremely micromanaged checklist and a micromanaged way or moving goalposts that we are always facing. That needs to go. Clarity is the first step towards action, and that is what we are seeing as a problem. So that's what I feel on this issue.
Thanks, Sanjay. Manishji?
Fundamentally, I look at compliances in two buckets. The way I run the business. One is the FDA related compliances, which deals with the quality of medicine. Okay, and I think the law is very clear, or the regulations are very, very clear on that, in terms of how a product has to be manufactured, what kind of tests it has to go through before the product is made available to the public, whether in India or outside India. Now, where we fail is that the way we produce, or historically we are a byproduct of license charge of the past, wherein everything was in a way controlled. And the operations aspect of it is where we have grave challenges as a country. I have run plants in India and outside India. And in fact, my major experience was outside India. When I was running plants outside India, I never had faced any inspector or anybody coming into the plant. And the only time a politician visited us, and actually I was scared when the politician came, because I thought he'll make some demands. The thing he asked me was, is there anything we can do to make your plant more viable? While in India, if somebody comes, we are all perspiring because we don't know what he is going to ask. I'll give you another example, like a small example which we faced in one of our plants. The regulation says that the company should have adequate technical people in each shift. Now, who defines this word adequate? Okay, we know that all of our people working there are B Pharms or M Pharms or BScs and MScs, because that's the nature of pharmaceutical industry. Now, one fine day, an inspector comes and he says, this word adequate is not met. And he can give you a closure notice. So these are the aspects that need fundamental change, that actually industry, unless you do something wrong, you're doing right. While Indian mindset is you're doing wrong and it's our job to catch you. So this fundamental principle has to change, and we are a long way to go. I mean, even when the government comes with single window or simplification of laws, they will make it complicated in another way. The law has to be, you cannot fix the old laws which are there. They have to be done away with. And that is something we are not ready for in a way as a country.
Thank you very much, Manishji, on that take. I think, Kaizad, very interestingly, you see, we always talk of, let's say, European regime on compliance to be comply or explain regime, so to speak, to say that fine, you do it on your own, on the principle based, but if something goes wrong, we're going to kind of levy huge penalties on you. And there is an element of decriminalization, which actually kind of promotes culture of compliance, which is principle based compliance. And what Manishji alluded is actually saying that we are in the regime where it is comply or perish. If I see you, if I find you at the micro level, you're not filled the form. What is the letter of that law is more important than the spirit behind that compliances. And from that perspective, I think the regulators make it more complex. Today, as it is, there is a legislative complexity in the compliance domain. Then there is a implementation that happens in a completely non-objective manner. I'm just putting it lightly, in a completely non-objective manner. In that situation, I think neither jugaad works nor chalta hai attitude works. You see, and therefore, is it not enough experience today that the industry has to push back onto the governments to say that why don't you simplify the regimes? Why don't you move from comply or perish to comply or explain? And you see, there are two elements here, and that I want to just touch base upon it is, when we talk about self-regulation, we have seen in Indian context, the self-regulatory regimes, whether you take mutual fund or whether you take erstwhile ASCII, you see, the self-regulatory domains have not worked because there are some rogue elements. There are bound to be rogue elements in every jurisdiction, but there are some rogue elements. We actually take the center stage and make sure that the self-regulatory regime is defeated. Now, benchmarking ourselves to the global kind of standards on the compliances, whether it is culturally, process-wise, people-wise, it's something that we used to undertake in almost every multinational as an exercise. And that probably was the need of the hour. But in Indian context today, while the simplicity of compliance is better said than actually done and implemented, how do you kind of marry both these together? And is there any wish list as we move forward? Because if you have to take the center stage at the global level, I think this issue has to be cracked.
See, it's not a very easy thing. Because under pharma sector and under various sectors, every single aspect, there are so many compliances. Starting from a pharmaceutical point of view, starting from the time you buy a raw material, how it is stored, how that raw material is processed, how finished product is manufactured, labeling requirements, then again storage, distribution, retail, again stock return, and multiple compliances are there. And self-regulation under some of those aspects may not be ideal. I don't think so that can work in some of but for some other aspects it can work. But if you see, they've wanted self-regulation for UCP-MP, which I don't know. I don't think so it has been so successful, but let's see how it is progressing. I don't want to comment on that and give it away that it's not working. But the problem is, it's not an easy answer. I think at best the government is trying hard. The government has decriminalized certain aspects under the companies law like that. I think maybe under the pharma law they can also look at some of those aspects, because filing a prosecution action against the company and the directors, and dragging these directors to towns where instead of just levy penalty and move on, like in US everything is you have to pay the penalties, and penalties are quite large. Sometimes those run into huge amounts. Say antitrust violations, in US the liability is so huge. It really is a deterrent for companies not to get caught under those violations. So similarly, I think one has to play a right balance between what can be done and what laws are required, like GMP and all those have to continue. But on certain other aspects, the clutter or the compliance levels can be reduced to some extent. But the most complex things are the gray areas, under the law. And invariably, people apply their best judgment under those gray areas. I would rather adhere towards more compliance than understanding that that gray area allows me not to do certain things. I would rather be more compliant than less compliant in those gray areas. So I think these are more individualistic, cultural thought processes, how the organization wants to deal with the compliance matters, whether they want to be better compliant, more compliant, or they would like to apply their judgment and say, no, I would rather follow what is written in the letter, not in spirit. So these are very tough things and not easy answers that, if you reduce the law, reduce the compliances, things will improve. I don't think so, Suhas.
Thanks a lot, Kaizad. I'm going to look at some simple steps, and Sanjay, I want to pick your brains on whether we talk about harmonization across the globe. You see, while I think the markets are getting more and more borderless and completely integrated, so to speak.
Right.
When we talk about compliances, they're as disintegrated as the number of jurisdictions that we are facing. We're trying to develop a program across 120 countries for a pharma company in the US, and we have realized that it's completely disintegrated,
Yes.
approach. So India as a regime, can't it start, although I'm kind of raising a very fundamental issue and a question here. Can't it start off by saying that let's just follow harmonization in terms of documentary compliances? Forget about what happens at the brick and mortar. Between document and brick and mortar, there is some delta, and I think it's there all across. But having said that, why can't we just simply say that, okay, let's follow the harmonization correctly?
Absolutely. I mean, this is exactly what is required. I mean, if you look at, say, European medical EMA's, guidelines, they are today's ICH guidelines are so. Under the harmonization label, they have become absolutely vague. They are open to interpretation. They can be interpreted in any which way. And as Manish and Kedar, they both are saying, they can be twisted in whichever way the regulator wants. But that would go away if, let's say, if we go with very clear harmonized guidelines, the way EMA is following, for example. EMA gives you very crisp, scientifically based guidelines. Now, eventually, when we go to Indian regulator, it says that, they don't have the guideline, but if the EMA has done it, let's accept that. So again, we are coming back to a harmonization. But the direction of harmonization is not to generalize it, but to make it more specific, more accurate, more clear. So these are opposite directions, 180-degree opposite. Generalization has not helped anyone. That is for sure. But then can we go towards more specific? And in that particularity, in that granularity of harmonization, is lying the success of the European EMA's guidelines. They are adopted all over the world. So I guess you are absolutely right. We need to move in, but the direction has to be towards clarity, not towards generalization.
No, thank you, Sanjay. I mean, before I conclude, I just want to kind of make one remark, and I would get a concluding remark from each one of you. But before that, one thing that we've noticed during COVID is that the consumer or the patient or the prospective consumer is today made aware about what happens when you actually go through a development phase of a molecule. You see, today the awareness has increased. What do you do when you have during the clinical trial when somebody dies? What are the ethical principles and fundamentals? I think that's one area at least we have experienced in COVID that everybody is aware about. Is it now right time for Indian pharma and biotech industry to ride this wave and drive the ethics to the hilt? In a sense, and I'm going to request Manish for his initial comments on this aspect, saying that it probably is a right time now to talk about the ethics that are getting followed in Indian industry and how the ethical ethics and compliance go together. There is no doubt about it. And how are we faring on the ethics principles across the globe? Is it not right time to ride this wave and drive home the point? Manishji.
So you're absolutely bang on in this observation. I think the Indian pharma industry has come a long way. We started with a lot of promise. We did kind of falter in between on the compliance front, but we have got our act together. And today is the time to raise the bar. Okay, we are all geared up. The entire industry in the last COVID environment has shown how critical and important it is for the global healthcare. And that comes from consistency of products and the consistency of processes that we have established over years. So today is the time to raise the bar, to bring in that last element of ethics, which is again has a lot of implications, but making it as part of your governance framework and making it as part of your business framework. Already a lot of companies have initiated it, but I believe the next 5 years will bring India in the forefront again in the healthcare sector in a very different way, wherein we'll be leading. So far, we have been more generics, but going forward, it will be not only biosimilars, but also specialty products that the country will be specializing in and will be taking a global leadership as far as pharma is concerned.
Thank you very much, Manishji. Kaisa, on the ethic front.
No, I think it absolutely makes sense. And if you would have seen, as you rightly mentioned, during these times, people level of awareness on clinical trial, data relating to the studies that are being conducted, maybe vaccines or any drug, has the anxiety and the awareness levels have really gone up to a large extent. And I think amongst the pharmaceutical companies also, inter se, people are using data of one company for the benefit of creating something different, new, which is ultimately helping the patients. That is fantastic. And companies are transparently, they were always that some of this information is always available in public domain, but because of the awareness level, it is coming in the forefront. But coupled with that also, there are challenges that we have seen where half knowledge is very dangerous. Normal people are also getting swayed away because of social media, negativity, negative publicity, wrong information, inaccurate assessments, judgments, doctors talking. So people get confused, so that also is part and parcel of this journey. When you have to bring in ethics, there are some things that will always get impacted, and this is one area which gets impacted because of that. But all said and done, I think we are moving in the right direction and hope this will continue post-COVID also. I think the awareness levels should continue post-COVID also, and companies should be more transparent, open, and bring things to the forefront in a simplistic manner so that people understand what the product is. Thanks.
No, very well articulated point, Kaisa. I think at one level there is a too much of information that we are saddled with today, and I think that information, it's very difficult to maneuver yourself in understanding what is fake, what is not fake. And there are various people today trying to help us, especially with the digital explosion that has happened. And I think the information asymmetry is tremendous, just to say the least. I think, Sanjay, I would take your point on the ethics and riding this curve and saying that now is a time to drive home the ethics. Your take on this, and then we'll just go around on the concluding remarks. Thank you.
Sure. So I'm going to point to 2-3 points here. Ethics is a very interesting contextuality in this situation, and particularly from this data explosion also. So on one hand, we are in a very positive kind of a frame. Regulatory timelines are crunching. For example, a regulatory clinical trial approval time, which was post application, which was 24 weeks. It has now come down to 4 weeks post data submission. So you can imagine. I mean, we had a situation in COVID times. We had a meeting in the morning, and by evening we had the minutes in hand. Okay, so this is something that's a correct direction. I would say we are moving in. Great. Second thing is the data that is exploding, as Manish was saying and as Kaiser was saying, that it is confusing, all right, but at the same time, with this deeper learning supercomputer, we just understood in COVID times what that cytokine storm was actually. It was a bradykinin storm. That kind of information coming out and actually helping everyone is great. Somebody could have sat on that data unethically and not made it available. So data transparency is also ethics. I mean, other countries are struggling with the data exclusivity laws, whereas we don't have that kind of barriers for sharing the data and actually helping patients by getting that data. So all those things are pointing in a right direction. And finally, I think the data integrity standards, because of the electronic monitoring of clinical trials, etc., it is becoming well accessible now, which was actually way beyond our access a few years back. So we are moving in a right direction as far as compliance in the ethics part.
Yeah, Sanjay, concluding remarks. I think, you see, while we all kind of now say that the context is the emperor, so to speak, while you had content as a king, you had profit as the queen, context has become the emperor, which is currently in the COVID situation. So the concluding remarks insofar as this space of governance, risk, assurance, compliance, ethics, what we broadly called as GRACE,
Yes,
in this space.
very.
So actually, what are the concluding remarks so that probably pharma and biotech industry can look at it as a takeaway to push themselves in terms of a center stage at the global level? Concluding remarks. Thanks, Sanjay. Thanks.
Yes. So I think it was a illuminating session for me. To conclude, I feel that the compliance is a cornerstone, not only from the regulatory point of view, but from the patient point of view, from the manufacturer or the owner's point of view, as well as the investor point of view. We also need to see what compliance he looks at to increase the value of the businesses that we have. So that is one point. Second point is, if we were to move in a global compliance, the clarity is the key. The principle based, more non-micromanaged, and very clear harmonization would be the key. That's my conclusion on this.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sanjay. Manish ji, your take, final remark.
So again, thanks for bringing me on this panel, and it has been most illuminating in terms of what I learned from my fellow colleagues. Fundamentally, the way I see is that pharmaceutical industry, which has been in the forefront of compliance in a way for 20 years or maybe 30 years now, we understand our responsibility, not only for the Indian public, but also for the global world. Probably we now accelerated or kind of by the new COVID situation. As an industry, compliance has been important and has been the key to our success, but it was a rule-driven compliance in a way historically. My view is going forward, it'll be an ethics-driven compliance, wherein ethics will play the large, because all others can be dictated. Compliance and other aspects are dictated, but ethics are something inherent. And that is what I believe will drive the next phase of industry, wherein Indian companies will become ethic leaders around the world in the pharmaceutical sector and use it as a competitive edge as we go forward.
Thanks a lot, Manish ji. Thank you very much. Kaizad, concluding remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Swas. I think very interesting, and I thoroughly enjoyed this discussions with all the co-panelists and you, Suhas. So my concluding remarks are that, see, the organizations have to move towards bringing about compliance in their DNA. So it has to be brought in at that level. And compliance is a journey, as we all discussed. It's a constant evolution. You cannot be complacent that you are doing something, so now it's a journey. One has to keep doing it and keep improving upon things, because there will always be some improvement that is required. And the most important thing is that the support from the topmost leadership, tone from the top and reinforcing it from time to time is very, very critical. Compliance is not it should not be a paper compliance. It should be in letter and spirit. And the most important thing, the perception that we talked about, as you rightly mentioned at the beginning of your session, I think the industry is doing so much, for the world. The pharmaceutical industry as such has done so much, and we Indian companies are doing so much, I would say, but somewhere it is getting lost. So as an industry, people should make an effort to bring about in the forefront all the good things that the organization is doing, because that to changing that perception that people outside of India have is also very critical, is also a part of this compliance thing, which has to be achieved by the industry. As a responsibility of this industry, it has to be achieved.
We've had some interesting discussions on various topics across pharma and biotech. I just want to request Debelina for her closing comments and any remarks that you may have.
Closing comments, you see the pharma industry and the healthcare industry, as you said it, and also Manish also echoed your view in terms of that it is ring-fenced industry. And nothing can go wrong with this industry. It's always protected, and it's under any circumstances, be it a pandemic or a flood or any disaster, any force majeure event, the industry keeps on and on, because the main aim of this industry is saving patients' lives, saving the people, saving the civilization. So I think where we stand today and where we intend to leap ahead is getting better technology in the industry, simplifying healthcare delivery systems, especially in Asia, and of course not to forget our own country, where the actual deliverables in the healthcare, whether it's a treatment or a medicine or some drug delivery system or whatever, and the patient, there is minimal time, so that everybody is treated or is attended to, as we quote in medical terms, the golden hour. Nobody misses the golden hour. I think that's the aim of the pharma and healthcare industry globally today, to take that leap forward, getting into a super technology, whether it is gene technology or something to do more in the e-space, something to do more in terms of biological improvements, and of course our drugs, our products, and alternate medicines. But I would like to close by saying the industry is definitely going to see to it that as more and more people don't miss the golden hour, and more people see the better life. And Wockhart's, especially I would like to say on behalf of Wockhardt, that our motto is saving patient lives, life wins. So I think with that, I would like to close my comments. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Debelina. I think you impressed upon not merely manufacturing, but actually going up to the end and keeping patient and patient care at the center of whatever we do. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. I must say thanks to all four of our panelists today. Thanks a lot, Dr. Sanjay Sonar. Thank you very much, Manish Gupta ji. Thanks a lot, Kaizad, my friend. I think, while it's a vast topic, and one of the very critical aspects that I would love to touch base with you is a fundamental principle that we are experiencing during COVID situation, globally and more so in India. You see, while we have seen that the companies are shrinking in terms of their revenues, in terms of their economic performance, you see, their stock prices are going up. I think the investors are looking at companies that are responsible businesses, companies that talk about sustainability, company that talk about being responsible to their stakeholders as a value proposition rather than anything else. And we're probably seeing a maturity moving from merely profitability or profit driven enterprise to more of a responsible business that kind of takes into confidence all the stakeholders, including their consumers, patients in this case, in the pharma and biotech space. So I think that probably is a good news for all of us, so that we can say, it's not about cost of compliance or non-compliance any longer. It's about getting that sustainability and value proposition. And that empirical evidence in a case is being made out. And I think COVID has brought that to the forefront. Thank you very much. On that note, I'm going to sign off. Thanks a lot. We would love to come back, discuss again and again various issues. But thank you very much for today's discussions.
Thank you, Suhas.
Thanks, Suhas. Thanks. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, panelists, for that highly stimulating conversation. We now move on to the second set of awards. Over to you, Ryan.